A new record from the West Coast is situating the story of the Métis people in choral music. Its creator, however, is rooted right here on the prairies, the homeland of the Red River Métis. Histoires des Metis, The Freedom Songs, is the latest composition by T-Pat Carrabre and is now being shared in a recording by the Vancouver Chamber Choir, led by Kari Turunen. Pat Carrabre joins us from Vancouver this morning to tell us more about the work and the recording. Good morning to you, Pat.
Oh, hi. Hi, Nolan. It's great to talk to
you. Likewise. So you tell us a little bit about how this work first came to be. What was the genesis for capturing these freedom songs for you?
Oh, wow. It's an interesting story. A friend of mine, George Laverock, who's used to work at CBC, and then he did a whole variety of things, presenting music out here in Vancouver, asked me to come over for dinner because he wanted me to meet his friend, Jean Taillet. And he knew that we were both Métis. And her husband is Ed Henderson, who's also a composer. And so we got together with my wife, and Jane Coop is George's wife. So it was a whole bunch of musicians all together, and with Jean actually being the only non-musician. She started out as a contemporary dancer and then became a lawyer. She's a very famous Métis lawyer, and she's also, I think, the great-grandniece of Louis Riel. So anyway, we all got together, and George had this idea that he thought Jean and I should do some, a piece together. And he was on the board of the Vancouver Chamber Choir at the time. So we got together, and as happens with Métis people, we're all cousins. So Jean and I, go back to a great grandfather's Lachemaudière. So we hit it off and had some really great conversations. And we, after a while, the chamber choir actually applied for some funding to make this project happen. And by that time, we all went, yeah, this is going to be a great idea. And Jean went off and wrote a collection of 5 sets of words. And we agreed that we would include a couple of other kind of historically important Métis songs or texts as part of this, and got to work.
So we've talked a little bit about Jean Taillet and her background as a lawyer, but you also have said that her work has been instrumental in documenting the truths of the Métis people. What does that work look like, and how do you translate that into your music?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, Jean, argued some important legal cases on behalf of the Métis at the Supreme Court. And as part of that work, she did a lot of historical research. And then she wrote a book called The Northwest is Our Mother, which is fantastic documentary history of, using archival materials and, like things like the newspapers of the time and again, legal proceedings and things like that to really get at the truth of what happened, because it's not, I mean, I grew up in Winnipeg, and we see names on streets that we don't, the meaning of how and why these people came to the territory is not really well known. So Jean does a fantastic job of going back, and it's kind of an ugly history, and Louis Riel obviously was eventually hung, as by a kind of a kangaroo court after Batoche. But I mean, he had been very instrumental in what I think was, proposing a fantastic place where all the different people who were in the Red River territory at the time could live and work together and realize their dreams. But Canada at that point was not having any part of this. They sent in hooligans who were, they were a bunch of murderers and rapists. Like, it was horrible. And they were given free land in Manitoba for, to come and abuse the people who were already here. So it's kind of a a tragic story, except that in the end, Louis Riel kind of again prophesied that the Métis people would sleep, for some time, but it would be the artists that would wake us up in the future. And I think this our little contribution to helping to bring some of these truths to the foreground and paint a picture of how much the Métis love the land, and really we're trying to bring a willingness to share the beauty of the place with everyone who wanted to come and live here.
The way that Jean Taillé has described the Métis experience seems like it had a very profound impact on yourself. What did you learn maybe about the Métis story that perhaps was new information as the Métis story continues to be pieced together?
Yeah, well, I mean, I learned a lot, and again, I think the richness and the kind of complicated familial relationships, like because the Métis back 150 years ago were not maybe a unified body the way that we are now, in that there were the bois brûlés, the burnt wood people who were mostly that were francophone, in speaking Michif, which is a mixture of Cree and French, or as my Métis mom would say, we speak the bad French. And on one side, and then on the other side, though, there were the half-breeds, coming from the Scottish side. And it was really this attack from Ontario that brought the two sides together to kind of try and protect the way of life that they had built out here on the prairies. And then it took the extinction of the buffalo, the bison, to completely kill that way of life and force everybody off what they had as a nomadic life, where they followed the buffalo for part of the year to get food. That wasn't a possibility anymore. So in my family, my Métis birth mother said, she was told to just tell everyone she was French. If she ever mentioned that she was Métis, she got a smack from her parents saying, "Don't say that, we're going to be in trouble." So and I've looked actually at historical records. You look at the census, and my family, sometimes they're put down in the census as French and sometimes as Métis or half-breeds. So, even within the small confines of the next 100 years, it was really important to be hiding because it was dangerous to be Métis.
Right. So you talked about your mom and the bad French, and it occurs to me that the language of these words of Jean Taillé that you set to music might be the subject of some conversation as well, because you talk about the different families, the different communities of Métis, the versions of Michif or French can differ even within families, let alone within communities. How do you come to a consensus of language to try and communicate the stories of the Métis in working on this piece?
Yeah, well, I mean, neither Jean nor I are fluid Michif speakers, but we did, and which is why we chose to include two songs with text by other people. So the whole set of 7 songs starts out with a piece called La Montagne Tortue, Turtle Mountains. So it's the song that the Métis sung as they walked to the Turtle Mountains to start off the buffalo hunt, right? So, and it's kind of a fun song. It's a little bit cheeky. One of the verses even says, yes, we're the Métis and we wipe our butts with birch bark, it's kind of one of these things where you're giving everybody a hard time as you're walking, because it would be a walking song where somebody sings a verse and then everybody answers the verse, The other one we included was what's often called the Battle of Frog Plain in English, by Pierre Faucon, who was the first kind of Métis composer. And it's about the Battle of Frog Plain, Chanson de la Grenouillère. And it was recorded by a francophone person who was documenting, like an anthropologist documenting old songs by recording old Métis singers. So and that song exists in an English or kind of version that was there was an effort to try and fix the mistakes that the poor ignorant folk people would have, right? So they've squared off the thing. But this recording that I found, or this documented version of the piece, is wild. It's all over the place. Like the text is long in some lines and short in others, and what Jean calls the crooked rhythms of the Métis, where you add an extra beat here and there. So I tried to keep that version of the text rather than the more sanitized kind of four square version. And Jean uses a few words of Michif in some of her poetry as well, but generally we're blending all these things together, and hopefully to give an idea of not just the history of the Métis, but also the kind of just love of the territory and dreams for the future as well.
Yeah. This recording done by the Vancouver Chamber Choir, what was the reaction of the singers to these crooked rhythms and this approach to language as you're making this record?
Yeah. No, I mean, it was fun because Jean and I went to maybe the third rehearsal. You give them a little bit of time to kind of get used to the thing and curse and swear at you under their breath if they need to, and then you show up to try and give a little color commentary. And Jean had written a little paragraph kind of describing why she selected that story, or that, what it was she was trying to get at. And I think the singers, the really only difficult movement they had was the movement called Lorette, which is, it's a very tragic and horrible story about this gang rape of a poor young Métis girl by the Canadian Army, which, as Jean points out, became the Mounties. That they eventually just were, from this militia, became the Mounties. But I mean, we had to work. Look, I can hardly get through that piece without crying myself, even when I was writing it. And so Kari had to talk a lot to the singers about how to not go to the emotion of the text and think about that so that they could get through the piece as well. I mean, it's one of those things. These are hard things to put into music, but I think it's important to try once in a while. And I'm pretty happy that I think we did justice, within the context of what you can do in a small song to deal with some of these horrible things that happened in history.
So these kinds of pieces, these stories, oftentimes will spark conversations, especially if you have settler performers, white performers singing these words. What were the conversations like between maybe yourself and Jean and the choir as this recording was being made?
Yeah, I think that there's a real willingness to engage with some of these difficult stories, and I mean, they're not all that way. Like, the song about the buffalo dreamers and how much we dream that the bison will come back to the prairies and stuff like that. So some of these things are really positive, and even the idea that the Métis people stayed in Red River because they were free there. There was an opportunity to make a life that you wanted which is why a lot of people came to Winnipeg over the years. It was just far enough away from wherever you were trying to get away from that you could be the people that you wanted to be, whether that was the Ukrainians who came or the Mennonites who came or whatever group. And for the people who worked in the fur trade, they were coming from, wouldn't have been allowed to own land or choose the life that they wanted. So there was some real beauty in that freedom. So I think engaging with the choir, everybody has their own feeling about Canada and the pros and cons of it. So I think it's good for us to share these stories and to have settlers, wherever they're from and however long they've been here, engaging with the history of this country and trying to figure out, okay, how do we think about making it an even better place? Because, the reality is we've had a lot of challenges. We still have a lot of challenges. But if we can be in the right relationship with each other, then I think we have a better chance. And knowing the stories is one of the things that can give us that opportunity. I mean, I just think about this morning, thinking about the Syrian refugees, and how they came to the country and how they were not super welcome when they first came. I wrote a piece about that called Just Society because it struck me that we really had to think carefully about what it means to try and build a country where people can be free and have their values and not be afraid.
You're someone who's shared a lot of stories from a lot of different perspectives over the years. People will obviously remember your tenure as the composer in residence with our own Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra in the 2000s. You mentioned that piece about the Syrian refugees. And you're someone who shared them in a lot of ways, be they through music with or without words, or lectures in your roles at Brandon University and at UBC, or even as a broadcaster yourself. What power does this music, choral music, have to share the stories of the Métis, the Histoires des Métis, that perhaps other mediums do not?
Yeah, the song is something that is very physical. If you can't afford, like the Métis we're famous for our fiddles, and stuff, but singing is really important as well. And I think just that, I mean, when Jean talks about the early Métis who were still voyageurs, that paddling and singing together is such an important, it gives you you just feel it in your body because it is in your body. And so I think choral music, and this is an a cappella piece, so it's there are no other instruments, but I think there's a richness and a physicality to the medium that really allows people to connect with the ideas, and I know, I remember Sid Rabinovich talking about text in choral music, and he said, most people won't know what the text is anyway. It doesn't really matter. I could pick anything for the text. But I really think, particularly Vancouver Chamber Choir for this recording, the text is so clear. It's so easy to understand what they're trying to sing to you, what they're trying to say to get the message across, that I think it's really galvanizing. It's just an opportunity to sit and think about these things for 20 minutes, half an hour. Take some time and hopefully let it touch your soul.
Yeah. What do you think people in the Métis community, perhaps here on the homeland of the Red River Métis, will take away from hearing these pieces?
Wow, I try not to think about that kind of stuff,
Or perhaps maybe we'll phrase it a different way then. Maybe what do you hope that
Yeah,
they?
I think, I mean, I just hope that pride in our heritage, because we've come in the last few years. I mean, when I was still teaching in Brandon, I remember hearing an academic paper about the road allowance people and the negative impact it had on the health of Métis people, because when this, when our script was to become when I eventually got my citizenship in the Red River Métis, they send you copies of the script that your ancestors were given, and it's usually, there was a whole process whereby which land speculators would pretend that you had sold them the land. They would mark it with an X saying they sold it to me because the Métis couldn't, they were illiterate, right? Which was not true. But they would do, so they send, I have these copies of where my, great grandparents' land was taken from them, and to kind of have those physical, like this, and as a result, we were not covered by a treaty, right? And so a lot of the Métis lived in the ditch. Like literally, it was the only place you could get a place to live. And if you're living in the ditch on the side of the road, you don't pay taxes. You can't go to school. You can't go to the doctor, right? So I think when I think about how difficult that life was, for a really for my family, we weren't living, we were from Saint-Pierre-Joly, so we lived in town, but there were a lot of people who were in very difficult situation. So I think to come to feel like we're now able to be fully recognized for the qualities that we bring as individuals and the rich tradition we bring culturally, I think is really important. So anything we can do to celebrate our place in society, I think is good.
A richness that continues to grow as we continue to fill in the story of the Métis people. It's a really beautiful record. Pat, thank you so much for joining us here on Classic 107 to tell us more about it.
Thanks so much, Nolan. Really appreciate it.